the first new face is going to be SawChruhtezz, and I'm so glad that he came. Our #1 headline speaker was my good friend Tyler Jenks, and we all know, of his untimely passing. But I don't think there's ever an untimely passing. All things work to good for those who love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. And I think that Tyler Jenks' legacy will always be recognized in Bitcoin. He was only here for a short period of time, but he's taught so many of us so much. And so I'm done because I'm going to bring up SawChruhtezz, who was Tyler Jenks' #1 mentor.
All right. Well, I sure appreciate you bringing me up here, Ugly. It's definitely quite the honor to be able to do what I can to fill in for somebody who will definitely never be replaced, but did, as Ugly said, leave us with so much knowledge that his name will definitely live on for a very long time, and it will be through people like you and I who were lucky enough to have the pleasure to get to know him while he was here. His time in Bitcoin was definitely much more brief than anybody was expecting, but it will last much longer than any of us probably are aware of right now, because he did make a tremendous difference. So we do have a video that we'll be pulling up here in a second. The topic of my talk today is the 10 pillars of Bitcoin, and I was really hopeful to be able to share Tyler's perspective on that, but as we will potentially see, he has a very unique ability to think on a much larger scale than anyone else, and he's definitely one of the most intelligent people that I've ever met. So some of his pillars of Bitcoin flew right over my head, and therefore I couldn't really do his presentation justice per se, but definitely will be some similarities, but there will be some that hopefully maybe some people in the audience will help me to understand better before this cruise is finished. So my name, I go by SawChruhtezz, and I think this is being recorded, so I do stay anonymous online. If anybody wants to know my real name, that's not a problem. I will definitely look forward to getting to know everybody throughout these next few days, and it's great to see some familiar faces in the crowd. So definitely happy to be here tonight. It's always a very good time to talk about Bitcoin, and today that is especially true thanks to this conference that Ugly Old Goat has put on. Two things that are very close to my heart are entrepreneurship and Bitcoin. I've been employed by myself since I was 19 years old. I have had a strong desire to build something of my own, opposed to trading my time and giving my energy to somebody else or another company. So I am a big proponent of entrepreneurship and believe that everybody has the ability to be in business for themselves in one way or another. So definitely am happy to be here, not only to represent Bitcoin, but also my passion for entrepreneurship. And I appreciate everybody who is in attendance. So before we get into the video, just wanting to see if there is anything left for me to say, and that is pretty much everything that I wanted to cover. Is that what you will hear from him, I'm sure, is much better than what I'll be able to provide, but I will be very interested in talking about some of these points that he brings up that I don't quite understand yet myself. So that being said, we can go ahead and throw that on.
All right.
You know what the light is?
See if it works.
What we're going to do on the conference, I'm not going to write an article. I will present it for the first time at the conference, and we will do each one of the 10 in great detail. But I could list the 10 just so people know what I'm thinking in terms of what this Bitcoin is is really all about, because it's different. And if you think it's the same as Litecoin or Monero or Cardano or Ethereum or any of the other ones, you're mistaken. You must be able to understand what is absolutely unique about Bitcoin. And there are these 10 qualities that nothing else can reproduce. We talked about.
All right. You know what? We can't stop you now. So I'll give you, you got 2 minutes. Just list them off, but you can't go. How long is it going to take?
I won't explain them. I'll just list them. Number 1 is singularity. Number 2 is transferability. Number 3 is unconfiscatability. Number 4 is privacy. Number 5 is invisibility. Number 6 is divisibility. Number 7 is fungibility. Number 8 is anonymity. Number 9 is universality. And number 10 is eternality. Each one of those has been created in this little paper called the white paper without naming any of them. But the essence of what we all know about Bitcoin can be summarized in those 10 things. And when people understand that, then we will be ready for Bitcoin to go to 50,000, 100,000, 500,000, a million, 5 million, and $10 million. And it will do it. But we're not quite there yet.
I'm not interested in being right or wrong necessarily. I'm most interested in getting people to think for themselves. And that's why I have included his number 1 pillar, singularity, as my number 1 pillar, because clearly it's something that I need to think about for myself some more. So there are 2 definitions if you look up singularity. One for technology, which we'll read first here. And it is a hypothetical point in the future when growth becomes uncontrollable and irreversible, resulting in unfathomable changes to human civilization. So definitely see a few ways that could apply to Bitcoin, but still needing to give that some more thought to understand why that was Tyler's number 1 pillar. A hypothetical point in the future when growth becomes uncontrollable and irreversible, resulting in unfathomable changes to human civilization. So definitely see a few ways that could apply to Bitcoin, but still needing to give that some more thought to understand why that was Tyler's number 1 pillar. The mathematical definition is a point at which a function takes an infinite value, especially in space-time when matter is infinitely dense. So that is singularity, and that will be our number 1 pillar of Bitcoin. The next 9 will be as I understand them myself. And the number 2 will be the stock to flow ratio. For me, the most important aspect of Bitcoin, and the reason why I own it long term, is the stock to flow ratio. And that is the amount of a commodity held in inventories divided by amount produced annually. How much you have now in stockpiles versus how much is added to that annually. Higher the stock to flow ratio, the sounder the underlying asset would be as a monetary unit of exchange or store of value. And say that again?
You want higher stock?
Higher. If we're dividing the amount held in inventory. So if we say we have 10 in inventory and 1 added every year, 10 divided by 1 would be higher. So the more that the bigger that number is, the more sound the money is, which basically is explained by when you have something that is used primarily for money opposed to its underlying value as a commodity, demand goes up. And people want to start producing that commodity, and they also want to start holding it. And the harder it is for producers to increase the amount of the commodity, the more sound that it is. That is why gold has been used as money for such a long time. It is very, very hard to produce new gold, and the amount that is currently available is such that when people are incentivized to produce new gold, has very little impact on how much is actually available. Very different from a fiat currency, which can be increased at basically no cost to the producers. So that is the most important aspect of Bitcoin to me. And by the year 2025, Bitcoin will be the soundest money that human civilization has ever known. Gold has held that for as long as we can date back history, essentially. And for the first time in human civilization, that will be changed. In 2025, gold will have a higher stock-to-flow ratio. Bitcoin will have a higher stock-to-flow ratio than gold. And we know that good money drives out bad. And I am very hopeful that as Bitcoin becomes a better money, it will drive out the bad money that is plaguing our society. And then I want to also add that there will never be 21 million Bitcoin. A lot of people use that number as how the maximum amount of Bitcoin that will ever be available, but there is never going to be that much, ever. That if there's ever one lost deposit or transfer, then we have less than 21 million Bitcoin available. If there was ever somebody that invested when the price was very small and they did not secure their private keys properly, well, that means that we're going to have less than 21 million Bitcoin. And I am inclined to think that we're going to have significantly less than 21 million Bitcoin. And the case study that I point to is Full Tilt Poker. When they got shut down by the United States government, it went into a remittance process where if you had money on the site, you had to claim it. They had over $300 million on deposit, and over half of that money was people who had less than $100 in their account. And nobody went back to claim $50 because it was kind of a process to go through it. So that makes me think of the early days in Bitcoin when $50 bought you a whole lot of Bitcoin, but it really didn't put much skin in the game. And if you just had $50, it maybe bought you 100 or 500 Bitcoin because you liked the idea. Well, $50 maybe doesn't matter that much to you, so you didn't go through the process of actually securing your private keys and keeping them for the long run. So I'm inclined to think that a large majority of the Bitcoin bought in the early years has been lost due to people not properly securing it, due to not really having any idea of how far this thing could go in such a short amount of time. So not only will Bitcoin be the soundest money that the world has ever known, the stock-to-flow ratio will be much, much better than what anybody can prove, because there have been so many lost coins that the amount that will be available when they're done mining will be much, much, much less than $21 million. So the stock-to-flow ratio is the primary reason why I hold Bitcoin. Number two is the decentralization. The decentralization is the one thing that absolutely, there's multiple things, but the most important thing that separates Bitcoin from every other alternative cryptocurrency. Bitcoin is truly decentralized. And that is what can give investors confidence in the stock-to-flow ratio. If you have a centralized currency or monetary system, it's very hard to trust that the amount of supply will not get artificially increased as demand increases as well. Since Bitcoin is decentralized, we can have a very good amount of confidence, a very high degree of confidence, that the amount of Bitcoin and the amount that is added into the world will not be artificially increased as demand to mine and demand to hold continues going up over the years. Number 4 most important aspect for me is the difficulty adjustment. This is one of the most important aspects of Bitcoin that is a real game changer, an innovation that has never been around ever before. And what the difficulty adjustment does is makes it harder to produce Bitcoin when demand goes up. When the demand increases to mine Bitcoin, then it gets harder to do so. There is no other commodity in the world that becomes harder to produce when demand increases. Whether it be gold, silver, oil, whatever you want to point to as an alternative, it does not have a difficulty adjustment, which is extremely important over the long run. As demand increases, that is what tends to really ruin money. If you can start producing it easier as it becomes more popular, this is the opposite. In Bitcoin, it becomes harder to produce as demand goes up. And that is an extremely important aspect of Bitcoin for me. And just to continue that a little bit, that's where the big blockers really start to gain some traction, is when the demand goes up, like we saw in 2017, miners want to figure out a way to produce more Bitcoin because the price is going up, the demand is going up. So the way that they tried to attack that in the past was by increasing the block size. That is essentially the opposite of a difficulty adjustment. When you increase the block size, now you are allowing more transactions to get confirmed. You're allowing more Bitcoins to be mined more quickly as the demand is increasing. So that is a very important aspect for Bitcoin specifically, is that it has a difficulty adjustment and that there are no, and it's important to me that the market has recognized that bigger blocks are not the best solution, that it's not a problem that needs to be solved. It's actually a benefit when we have the difficulty increase as demand increases as well. Number 5 is durability. Sound stock-to-flow ratio is only possible with something that is highly durable. If you are, for example, dealing with a perishable good, let's say apples. If you're wanting to use apples as a currency, you would never be able to get a sound stock-to-flow ratio because they don't store for long enough. If you're producing them every year and then they spoil a few months later, you're never getting a stockpile that is big enough relative to the new apples that are being produced. So the durability aspect of Bitcoin is one of the most important pillars as far as I'm concerned, because not only will it allow us to get a very sound stock-to-flow ratio, the best that the world has ever known, it will also allow holders to store it if they are responsible with saving their private keys and backing them up. Bitcoin can last through a fire. That is something else about gold, why it has been such an attractive money for so long, is that it's not going to lose value due to erosion. There's not rain, snow, fire. Gold's going to last through, and it's going to not lose anything due to erosion. Bitcoin is the same way. So those are the most important reasons why I own Bitcoin, is not only the stock to flow ratio, but also how durable it is, as well as the difficulty adjustment, which makes it it makes it harder to mine as the value goes up. Number 6 on my list is value storability. So I realize that Ugly Will Goat disagrees that Bitcoin is a good store of value due to how volatile it is. And again, it's not important to me necessarily being right, just wanting to provide my own opinion. And I think that Bitcoin is the best store of value that the world has ever known. And my argument hinges on the time horizon that should be applied to any store of value. If you're buying gold as a store of value, you shouldn't be doing that for less than a few years. I mean, an absolute minimum, I'm thinking in my mind, if I'm trying to store my value, I'm wanting to set it aside for 5 years, 10 years, maybe more or less depending on individual's age. And if you are looking to store your value for less than a couple years, there's probably very, very good reason for you to do that, and any value lost is probably well worth it. Let's think about somebody like a Syrian refugee who is needing to flee the country, and they're needing to store their wealth for the next maybe 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, whatever the case may be, a very short time to store their wealth. Bitcoin is the best way to do that. Never before in human history could somebody flee their home country and take the majority of their wealth with them. Specifically, people who had a significant amount of wealth. If they were trying to get out, maybe they would wear some gold, maybe they would keep some diamonds. It would be very, very difficult to transfer the value that they had in their home country to wherever they were fleeing to. With Bitcoin, you can transfer hundreds of millions of dollars in your mind. You don't need anything physical. So if you find yourself in some sort of situation like that, and Bitcoin happens to go down 20 or even 50% before you're able to get out, you're probably going to be very happy to take that haircut because there was no alternative. Okay. So that is why I believe that Bitcoin is a great store of value, is because it should come with a very significant time horizon. I would say 5 years minimum or more. And if you have been storing wealth in Bitcoin for 5 years or more, you have done very, very well for yourself. And then if you do need to store value for less time than that, it's probably a bit of an emergency, and there is no better option than Bitcoin as far as I am concerned. My 7th pillar on the list is power. Power usage of Bitcoin is a benefit. It's not a problem. A lot of people want to tell you that the amount of energy that Bitcoin consumes is very wasteful, maybe it's bad for the planet, anything on down those lines. And I firmly believe that it is a benefit how much power Bitcoin uses, primarily because there needs to be a cost associated with producing new Bitcoin. If it was free to produce new Bitcoin, it would be free to attack the network. It would ruin the stock to flow ratio that has been set up. So the cost of power associated with mining is absolutely necessary. And the amount of power that Bitcoin is currently using is absolutely a good thing, because as adoption increases and the difficulty adjusts, we would expect more energy to be needed to maintain the network. And as that amount of energy increases, it is a very strong indicator of the actual value that Bitcoin holds. The market is willing to pay for what it values. If the market was unwilling to pay hard-earned money for all the energy that goes into maintaining Bitcoin, then it would be an indication that Bitcoin isn't really worth anything. But since the market is willing to pay the cost that is associated with maintaining the network, it is a very, very strong sign that this thing has actual value. And that is the first part of that number 7 is power. The second part is how empowering it is to hold Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the first time in modern civilization that individuals like you and I can take back sovereignty over our wealth. We have been getting screwed over for decades and generations. Every time the government prints more money, they are stealing that value from your pocket. If the amount of US dollars increases and you are holding US dollars, then the value comes from you. It doesn't come from anyone else. And Bitcoin is an alternative that we have never had before. The government has had ironclad control over the currency of its citizens since we entered the modern economy, which is dominated by fiat currency. And there has never been an alternative. Some people sure bought into gold and have held on to gold and have been able to maintain their value that way, but it has not allowed them to transact in gold in a modern society. You can't do anything with gold in a modern society. Whereas Bitcoin, every day as adoption spreads, businesses are starting to see the value in accepting Bitcoin and getting paid in Bitcoin. So the power that it takes to maintain the network is a very important part of the 7th pillar, but also it is the power that we take back into our own hands when we buy and hold Bitcoin. Okay, that one had quite a few. There we go. So number 8 is transparency. Don't trust, verify. That is a bit of a slogan for Bitcoin, and it is not possible for anything else in the world. Even something like gold. If you are wanting to verify how much gold is available in the world, your options are to go to a very centralized organization, the World Gold Council, who is highly incentivized to massage the truth or to flat out fabricate the information that is released. If I don't want to trust, then how am I going to verify how much gold is actually in the world? It's impossible. There's no way that you can actually do it. With Bitcoin, it is possible to not trust a centralized organization. It is possible to verify what is in the white paper for ourselves. So that is my number 8 pillar of Bitcoin. Number 9 is immutability. Defined as something whose state cannot be changed after it is created. Bitcoin is immutable as long as the market is able to distinguish it from altcoins and from forks. What we saw in 2017 with all the forks coming out from Bitcoin really goes a long way to show the sophistication of this market. We were able to identify the real Bitcoin amidst so much fear, uncertainty, and doubt. The market was able to come together and realize the real Bitcoin, and because of that, I have a very increased degree of confidence that we will be able to do that again and again and again. And as long as that is the case, Bitcoin is completely immutable based on the original code that Satoshi Nakamoto set up. All right, number 10, and we are at the last one, and that is divisibility. Purchasing power and divisibility is important, not absolute quantity. Keynesian economics is based on the idea that a growing civilization needs a growing money supply. As we get more citizens, more businesses, more workers, that we need more money to support that growing economy. That is a completely false premise. All that you need is to divide the money into smaller amounts and increase the value. We don't need more gold to go back onto a gold standard. We simply need gold to be worth about $400,000 an ounce. We don't need more Bitcoin than what will be available to operate a modern civilization, no matter how much we continue to grow, because we can continue to divide Bitcoin into very, very, very small amounts. And as the price goes up, there's no need to, or as demand increases and the size of a population increases, there's no need at all to consider increasing the amount of money. All that needs to be done is to increase the value and make sure that the asset is divisible. And that is again where gold falls short. If you are trying to divide gold into small enough portions, you need to essentially store the gold in a centralized bank and use money that is denominated in that to go ahead and use gold to transact. Bitcoin is different, and that is one of the main reasons why it is superior to gold, is that we are able to devise it into extremely small amounts without losing anything to, dust or anything along those lines. And then as the economy grows, that just means that the price of one Bitcoin would need to reflect that growth. And I will finish by saying that there is an article that Tyler Jenks put out on Medium, him and Leah Wald, and they talked about what if Bitcoin becomes a reserve currency for the world. Based on how much money is currently in the world, what would we need to value Bitcoin at for it to support a modern economy? And the answer is $10 million. If the price of one Bitcoin was $10 million, then there would be the wealth that is available in the world would have been transferred into Bitcoin, and at $10 million per Bitcoin, it would be capable of supporting a modern economy. So when we talk about holding, that is the number in my mind. I absolutely believe that in my lifetime we are going to see a return to a sound money standard, and Bitcoin has so much more to offer than any other alternative that I believe in my lifetime we are going to go on to a Bitcoin standard. So that's everything that I got for today. I really appreciate everybody's attention. Thank you very much. If anybody has any questions or anything, I'll be around and more than happy to go ahead and get into any of these ideas a little bit more in depth. So I will send this back on. I think that the biggest thing, two things that Bitcoin is missing is one, the barrier to entry. I think it needs to be a lot easier for a common person to get into owning their first Bitcoin or their first portion of a Bitcoin. It is very, very difficult for somebody that has maybe even a decent level of technical understanding for that person to buy their first Bitcoin or a portion of it and then have confidence in the way that it is stored. I don't know if there is a solution there, and maybe that is a benefit and not a problem, because it does force you to take responsibility in a big way for your actions. So I do like that it's hard and it forces people to learn, but I think that if we could solve that, the adoption would increase in a big way. And the second would be something that Tyler mentioned, and that's the altcoins. As long as altcoins there's a big market cap in altcoins, and as long as there are that many people who do not understand the difference between Bitcoin and altcoins, there is going to be a lot of nefarious actions, and it's going to be really hard for Bitcoin to shine and show the world what it really is when there's all these others claiming to be better than it. So from my perspective, I don't know if Bitcoin really needs anything more, but it does need people like ourselves out there helping new people and helping to spread the word, and also educating people about the difference between Bitcoin and altcoins. All right, good question, I appreciate it.